I came home from my daughter's wedding to find strangers trampling through my grandfather's cabin mud from their designer shoes grinding into floorboards he'd sanded by hand in 1943. The smell of expensive perfume mixed with pine needles made me sick to my stomach, but not as sick as the for sale sign hammered into my front yard like a tombstone. The realtor, dripping in jewelry that probably cost more than my truck, had the audacity to tell me I was trespassing. "This is distressed property," she sneered, waving papers that looked official enough to fool a judge. "HOA authorized the sale. You need to leave." The sound of measuring tape snapping echoed through rooms where 4 generations of my family had lived, loved, and died. I looked her dead in the eye and said, "Lady, they'll carry me out in a pine box first." What would you do if strangers were literally selling your family legacy out from under you? And where are you watching from? Drop your location below. Let me back up and tell you how this nightmare started. My name's Jake Morrison, and I'm a 52-year-old retired electrician who thought I'd found peace in the mountains of North Carolina. After a divorce that cost me half of everything I'd worked for, I moved into my grandfather's cabin. 3 acres of pure heaven that he built with nothing but determination and a set of calloused hands. This place has been in my family since 1943. Grandpa Ezra came back from the Pacific Theater with shrapnel in his leg and nightmares that never quite left him. But he had a dream. He wanted a place where his family could be self-sufficient, where no bank or government could take what was his. Every log in these walls, every stone in that fireplace, he placed them himself. The smell of wood smoke still carries his memory. The cabin sits on a dirt road that winds through pine trees so thick you can barely see the sky. When I step onto that wraparound porch in the morning, coffee steaming in my hands, I can hear absolutely nothing except birds and the creek running behind the house. It's the kind of quiet that heals your soul. But here's where things get complicated. About 10 years ago, some developer decided our little mountain community needed improvement. They built Pine Ridge Estates, a bunch of cookie-cutter houses with perfect lawns and 3-car garages. Nice enough, I guess, but not my style. The problem? They formed a Homeowners Association and somehow convinced the county that my grandfather's property should be included in their little kingdom. Enter Brenda Hutchins, our HOA president and the villain of this story. Picture a 58-year-old woman who moved here from California with more money than sense and a BMW so white it practically glows. She's got that power dress and pearls thing down to a science, and she talks like she's addressing a boardroom even when she's complaining about your grass being too long. Brenda has this way of looking at you like you're something she scraped off her designer heel. She calls me that maintenance man in the shack, which really gets under my skin. I've been an electrician for 30 years, built more houses than she's probably lived in, but in her mind, I'm just some redneck squatting on valuable real estate. The harassment started about 6 months ago. Brenda and her HOA board voted, and I use that term loosely since they never actually informed me there was a meeting to require all properties to meet new aesthetic standards. 15 grand worth of improvements, including new siding, professional landscaping, and a paved driveway to replace my perfectly functional gravel road. When I told her where she could stick her aesthetic standards, citing the grandfather clause in my original deed, that's when the gloves came off. Suddenly I was getting violation notices for everything. My grass was too tall, too short, the wrong shade of green. My truck was commercial equipment that violated residential zoning. My garden shed was an unauthorized structure, even though it's been there since 1955. The worst part? She started blocking my access complaints with the county. See, my driveway connects to what used to be a public road, but when the HOA formed, they claimed maintenance responsibility. Suddenly, that road needed repair work every time I had guests coming over. The final straw came 3 weeks ago. I got a certified letter claiming I owed $25,000 in back assessments for services I never requested and improvements I never approved. According to their twisted interpretation of HOA bylaws, any debt over $20,000 gave them the right to force a sale of my property. $25,000. For what? Retroactive landscaping fees and emergency road maintenance that somehow only applied to my little stretch of dirt. The letter was signed with Brenda's flowing signature and stamped with an official-looking seal that probably came from Office Depot. I should have known something was up when she approached my daughter Sarah at the wedding reception, asking all sorts of questions about my plans for the future and whether I'd ever consider downsizing. Sarah's a lawyer in Charlotte, sharp as a tack, but even she didn't see the setup coming. 2 days after I got back from the wedding, Sheriff Deputy Mike Collins showed up at my door with papers that made my blood run cold. Mike's a good guy, we went to high school together, but he looked uncomfortable as hell when he handed me that 30-day notice to vacate. "Jake, I'm real sorry about this," he said, avoiding eye contact. "But the HOA filed proper lien documentation. Says here you owe 25 grand, and if you don't pay up, they got the right to force a sheriff's sale." I stared at those papers, my hands actually shaking. The letterhead looked official, complete with county seals and legal jargon that might as well have been written in Sanskrit. The smell of fresh ink mixed with the morning coffee I'd been drinking, and suddenly everything tasted like betrayal. That's when I called Sarah. My daughter's voice went ice cold when I read her the notice over the phone. "Dad, this doesn't sound right. When I was in law school, we studied a case where someone tried to fake property liens. Real liens require specific filing procedures, and they have to give you proper notice before any assessment. Did you ever receive bills for these services?" "Not a damn thing," I told her. "First I heard about owing money was that letter last week. I'm driving up there tomorrow. Don't sign anything, don't pay anything, and whatever you do, don't let them in that house." The next morning, I drove down to the county courthouse, a red brick building that smells like old paper and decades of legal battles. I'd been here before when Grandpa died, dealing with probate, so I knew my way around. Behind the clerk's desk sat Elena Rodriguez, a woman who's been filing property documents since before I was born. "Elena, I need to check on some lien filings," I said, sliding the HOA notice across her counter. She adjusted her reading glasses and squinted at the paperwork. After a few minutes of clicking through her computer, she looked up with a frown that told me everything I needed to know. "Jake, honey, this is strange. I show the lien filing in our system, but when I pull up the actual document—" She paused, clicking her mouse a few more times. "The county clerk's signature is missing, and there's no notary seal. My daddy taught me to always check those two things when I started working here 40 years ago. Without both, these papers aren't worth the ink they're printed with." My heart started pounding. A fake lien. Brenda had actually tried to forge legal documents, but here's where it gets really twisted. When I called Sarah with the news, she dropped a bombshell that made my stomach turn. "Dad, I just checked my phone records from the wedding. Brenda texted me yesterday before you even got that sheriff's notice." Her voice was shaking with anger. She wrote, "Sarah, so sorry to hear about your father's financial troubles. If he needs help with the transition, I know some excellent senior living facilities." The pieces clicked together like a rifle bolt sliding home. She planned this whole thing. "More than that, Dad. Remember at the reception when she cornered me asking about your future plans? She knew exactly when you'd be gone, had the realtor lined up, probably figured you'd come home to a done deal and just roll over." That afternoon, Sarah filed an emergency injunction to stop any sale proceedings, but Brenda's next move proved she was way past playing by any recognizable rules. I woke up the following morning to the sound of chainsaws at 6 a.m. Through my bedroom window, I could see two guys in hard hats cutting down perfectly healthy pine trees along my property line. The whine of their saws mixed with diesel fumes, creating a symphony of destruction that made my grandfather's cabin feel like a war zone. I threw on clothes and marched outside, the gravel crunching under my boots like broken promises. "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" One of the workers, a kid who couldn't have been more than 20, looked up nervously. "Emergency tree removal. HOA says these are diseased and dangerous." He handed me a work order signed by Brenda Hutchins. I looked at those trees I'd climbed as a kid when visiting Grandpa. Trees that had weathered storms for 60 years and saw nothing but healthy bark and green needles. "Diseased my ass," I muttered. That's when I heard the rumble of heavy machinery coming up my driveway. A tow truck was backing toward my garage, where my perfectly legal pickup truck was parked. The driver hopped out with a clipboard and an attitude. "Jake Morrison, I'm here to impound the commercial vehicle. HOA violation." I'd had enough. "Get off my property, now." But as I watched that tow truck retreat and those chainsaws fire back up, I realized Brenda wasn't just breaking rules, she was declaring war. And I was about to learn just how dirty she was willing to fight. 3 days later, I got served with papers that made the fake lien look like child's play. A restraining order. Against me. Filed by Brenda Hutchins, claiming I had threatened violence and exhibited dangerous, unstable behavior toward community members. The deputy who served it, not Mike this time, but some rookie who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, handed me the papers with shaking hands. "Sir, you're prohibited from coming within 500 feet of Mrs. Hutchins or attending any HOA meetings until the hearing." I read through the affidavit, my coffee growing cold on the porch railing. According to Brenda's sworn statement, I had aggressively confronted her at my mailbox, used profane and threatening language, and made her fear for her safety. The kicker? She claimed I'd said, "You'll regret the day you messed with me." Complete fiction. I hadn't spoken to that woman face to face in months. But Brenda wasn't done. By that afternoon, a white security van was parked at the end of my driveway. Two guys in cheap uniforms and cheaper sunglasses sat there like discount Secret Service agents, writing down every time I walked to my mailbox or started my truck. The psychological warfare was just getting started. That evening, my internet went dead, then my landline. The next morning, I found a cancellation notice from the electric company taped to my door. Apparently, someone had called pretending to be me, claiming I was moving and needed service discontinued. The smell of paranoia started settling over everything like morning fog. Every car that drove past felt like surveillance. Every phone call made me wonder who might be listening. Sarah drove up from Charlotte that weekend, and what she found made both of us realize how deep this rabbit hole went. She'd brought her laptop and some kind of legal database software she used for research. "Dad, sit down. I've been digging into Brenda's background, and you're not going to believe this." Her fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up court records from California. 5 years ago, Brenda Hutchins was convicted of real estate fraud in Orange County. She used her position as HOA president to manipulate property sales, forge documents, and pocket commissions illegally. The screen showed a mugshot that made my blood freeze. Same perfectly styled hair, same cold eyes, but with a booking number across her chest. She served 18 months and moved here to avoid the civil lawsuits. "Dad, she's done this before. Multiple times." Sarah's voice was tight with controlled fury. "I'm betting she never disclosed this conviction when she ran for HOA president here." That explained the professional quality fake documents. Brenda wasn't some amateur neighborhood busybody. She was a career criminal who'd found the perfect hunting ground in HOA politics. But here's where I made my first real tactical mistake. Instead of staying quiet and building a case, I got mad. I drove straight to the HOA office Monday morning, restraining order be damned, and confronted the board members who'd been enabling her. The office smelled like stale coffee and lies. 3 board members sat around a conference table that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Bill Hartwell, retired banker, Diane Patterson, real estate agent, and Roy Morgan, some kind of consultant. "Did any of you know about Brenda's criminal record?" I asked, dropping Sarah's printouts on their polished table. The silence was deafening. Bill's face went white. Diane started shuffling papers like her life depended on it. Roy just stared at the documents like they might bite him. We had no idea," Bill finally stammered. "She told us she had extensive HOA experience in California." "Experience robbing people blind, you mean?" I was getting louder than I should have been, but seeing their shocked faces felt too good to stop. How many other homeowners has she been setting up? How many fake liens? How many forged documents? That's when Brenda herself walked in, probably alerted by her security goons that I'd violated the restraining order. She took one look at the criminal records spread across the table, and her mask finally slipped. "Those are lies," she hissed, but her voice cracked. "Desperate fabrications from a man who can't accept that his precious little shack doesn't belong in our community." "Your community?" I stood up, and I'll admit, my voice carried the kind of edge that comes from 30 years of manual labor and zero patience for bullshit. "Lady, my grandfather was building this place when you were still in diapers." She pulled out her phone and started recording. "This is exactly the kind of threatening behavior I warned everyone about. You're all witnesses to his aggressive intimidation tactics." I realized too late that I'd walked into her trap. Within an hour, that video would be edited and uploaded to the community Facebook page, making me look like exactly the unhinged recluse she'd been painting me as. But sometimes, when you're fighting dirty opponents, you have to get your hands dirty too. And I was about to learn that my neighbor Tom had some very interesting dirt of his own. Tom Bradley knocked on my door at 7 a.m. the next morning, holding a manila folder and wearing the kind of grim expression I remembered from when he'd been a cop. The man's built like a brick wall and has eyes that don't miss much, exactly the kind of neighbor you want when the world's going sideways. "Jake, we need to talk. Coffee?" I poured 2 cups while Tom spread photographs across my kitchen table. Security camera stills, property documents, and what looked like financial records. The steam from our mugs mixed with the morning light filtering through my grandfather's hand-built windows. "I've been watching what Brenda's doing to you, and it reminded me of something." Tom's voice carried that cop cadence, calm, methodical, but with an undercurrent that suggested somebody was about to have a very bad day. 3 months ago, she tried the same pressure tactics on me. Wanted me to upgrade my fence, said my workshop violated community aesthetics. He slid a photograph across the table. It showed Brenda's white BMW parked outside Tom's house at 2 in the morning, her silhouette visible near his mailbox. Caught her on my security system going through my mail. When I confronted her the next day, she claimed she was checking for unauthorized deliveries that might indicate commercial activity. Tom's laugh had no humor in it. "Commercial activity. I restore antique furniture in my garage." But Tom's real bombshell came with the next set of documents. Bank statements, HOA meeting minutes, and a ledger that made my coffee taste like acid. "I still have friends in law enforcement, Jake. Called in a favor and had someone take a look at the HOA's financial records." He pointed to a series of highlighted entries. "Over the past 2 years, Brenda's diverted almost $80,000 from the community maintenance fund into a separate account." The numbers told a story that made my skin crawl. Emergency repairs. That never happened. Professional consultations with companies that didn't exist. Legal fees for services nobody could identify. All approved by board votes that somehow always happened when certain members were conveniently absent. "But here's the kicker," Tom continued, sliding another document across the table. "Remember that geological survey the county did last year for the new water main?" I nodded. They drilled test holes all over the mountain, checking soil composition and water table levels. "Turns out your property sits on a significant mineral deposit. Rare earth elements worth a fortune to the right mining company." Tom's finger traced the survey boundaries on a hand-drawn map. "Brenda's been in contact with Cascade Extraction Corp. for 6 months. Guess who owns Cascade?" The shell company paperwork showed a corporate structure designed to hide ownership, but Tom's police contacts had followed the money trail. Cascade Extraction was owned by a holding company, which was owned by another corporation, which ultimately traced back to BH Enterprises' Brenda Hutchins. "She's been planning this for months, Jake. Force you off the land, buy it through the HOA for unpaid assessments, then sell the mineral rights to her own mining company for millions." I felt sick. This wasn't just about HOA power trips or property values. This was about stealing my family's legacy to make herself rich, and she'd been working every angle from day one. That afternoon brought the next escalation. 3 board members, the same ones who'd looked so shocked at Brenda's criminal record, called an emergency meeting. But this time, they weren't shocked. They were desperate. Sarah had driven up again, bringing a briefcase full of legal documents and the kind of focused energy that made opposing lawyers nervous. We arrived at the HOA office to find Bill Hartwell, Diane Patterson, and Roy Morgan huddled around their conference table like conspirators. "We voted," Bill announced without preamble, not even looking up from the papers in front of him. "Emergency sale of the Morrison property to recover outstanding debts and protect community assets." "You can't vote on something without proper notice," Sarah said, her lawyer voice cutting through the room like a blade. "HOA bylaws require 72 hours written notice to all affected parties." Diane finally looked up, and I could see the fear in her eyes. "Mrs. Morrison, your father's behavior has become increasingly erratic. For the safety of our community, immediate action is necessary." "Based on what evidence?" Sarah demanded. Roy slid a thick folder across the table. Police reports, witness statements, even medical evaluations suggesting I was suffering from isolation-induced paranoia and posed a threat to community safety. All fake. All signed by people I'd never met. All dated and notarized with the same professional precision that marked everything in Brenda's operation. "The sheriff's sale is scheduled for next Friday," Bill said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, Jake. We don't have a choice." But as we walked out of that office, past Brenda's BMW gleaming in the afternoon sun, I realized they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd shown their hand too early, and they had no idea what my daughter was capable of when someone threatened her family. Sarah didn't speak during the entire drive back to my cabin. She just sat in the passenger seat, her laptop balanced on her knees, fingers flying across the keyboard with the intensity of someone who'd found a scent and wasn't letting go. The only sound was the hum of her laptop fan mixing with the crunch of gravel under my truck tires. When we got inside, she spread her research across my grandfather's old dining table, the same table where he'd planned his garden every spring, where my father had done homework, where I'd taught my daughter to play chess. Now it was covered with legal documents that would either save or damn everything we'd built here. "Dad, sit down. What I'm about to show you changes everything." The first document she pulled up made my heart stop. A criminal background check showing Brenda's full record, not just the California conviction Sarah had found earlier, but a pattern stretching back 15 years. Arizona, Nevada, Colorado. Always the same scheme. Join an HOA board, manipulate property sales, disappear before the civil suits caught up. She's not just a criminal, Dad. She's a career predator who specializes in exactly this type of fraud. Sarah's voice carried the controlled fury of someone who'd discovered just how deep the corruption ran. But that's not the worst part. The next set of documents showed Brenda's real endgame. Corporate filings for something called Mountain Heritage Development, listing her son-in-law Marcus Kellerman as CEO. The company had already filed preliminary permits for mining operations, pending acquisition of strategically located mountain properties. Remember when I said she'd been planning this for months? Try years, Dad. She moved here specifically because someone told her about the mineral deposits. The geological survey wasn't random. She requested it through county contacts, claiming community infrastructure concerns. I stared at the survey results Tom had shown me earlier, but now Sarah had the full report. My 3 acres didn't just sit on valuable minerals, they controlled access to the entire deposit. Without my land, any mining operation would be impossible. "She can't just steal your property and strip mine it," I said. But even as the words left my mouth, I could see Sarah's expression that I was wrong. "Dad, she's been forging HOA documents for 2 years, board meeting minutes that show votes that never happened, assessment notices that were only sent to people she wanted to target, financial transfers that board members never approved." Sarah pulled up a spreadsheet that made my stomach turn. She's stolen almost $200,000 from community funds, but she's hidden it so well that most homeowners don't even know they're victims. The scope of the fraud was staggering. Fake maintenance contracts with companies that existed only on paper. Professional services billed to the HOA but never performed. Emergency assessments approved in meetings that the legitimate board members had never attended. "But here's the part that's going to send her to federal prison," Sarah said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "She's been using the U.S. mail to send these forged documents. Mail fraud is a federal crime, and when you're using an organization like an HOA to commit ongoing fraud, that's RICO territory." She showed me a timeline that read like a criminal masterpiece. Every forged document, every fake assessment, every manipulated vote, all part of a systematic plan to steal not just my property, but community assets worth millions. The mineral rights alone are worth $15 million, Dad. But she needed your land to access them, so she created this elaborate fraud to force you off at a fraction of market value. I sat back in my grandfather's chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what we were facing. This wasn't just about a power-hungry HOA president anymore. This was organized crime, and my family's legacy was ground zero for a theft that had been years in the making. But as I looked at my daughter's determined face, I realized something that made me smile for the first time in weeks. Brenda might be a career criminal, but she'd made one fatal mistake. She'd underestimated what happens when you threaten a Morrison's home. The War Council assembled in my kitchen the next morning. Sarah sat at the head of Grandpa's table with her laptop and 3 legal pads, looking every inch the Charlotte attorney who'd never lost a case she cared about. Tom occupied the chair by the window, positioned where he could watch the driveway old cop habits die hard. And then there was Marcus Morgan, the local journalist who'd been sniffing around the HOA story for months. "Gentlemen," Sarah began, spreading documents across the table like a general planning a siege, "we're not just fighting Brenda Hutchins anymore. We're taking down a criminal enterprise that's been operating under the cover of civic responsibility for 2 years." The smell of strong coffee mixed with the scent of pine needles drifting through the open window, creating an oddly peaceful atmosphere for planning what amounted to a legal war. Marcus pulled out a digital recorder the size of a matchbox. I've been investigating HOA abuse cases across 3 counties, but what you've uncovered here is the motherlode. Sarah, can you walk me through the RICO implications? RICO, the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, applies when someone uses a legitimate organization to commit ongoing criminal activity. Sarah's voice took on that lecturing tone she'd inherited from years of courtroom experience. Brenda's been using the HOA as her personal crime syndicate. Mail fraud, wire fraud, extortion, theft, it's textbook organized crime. She showed us a timeline that read like a criminal masterclass. Every forged signature, every fake vote, every stolen dollar, all documented with the precision of someone who understood that federal prosecutors love clear patterns of behavior. Tom leaned forward, his cop instincts engaged. What about the other victims? If we can show this wasn't just targeting Jake, but part of a broader pattern. Already on it. Sarah pulled up a spreadsheet that made my coffee taste bitter. I've identified 11 other homeowners who received suspicious assessments or violation notices in the past 18 months. 3 of them actually paid money they didn't owe because they trusted the HOA's authority. The genius of Brenda's scheme was its subtlety. Most victims never realized they'd been robbed. A few hundred here for emergency maintenance, 1,000 there for legal consultations, amounts small enough that busy homeowners just paid rather than fight. Marcus whistled low. This is bigger than local news. I'm talking state-level corruption, maybe national attention if we play it right. Which brings us to strategy, Sarah said, flipping to a fresh page in her legal pad. We could file criminal complaints right now, but Brenda would just disappear like she has before. We need to catch her in the act, on record with witnesses. Tom's suggestion surprised all of us. What if we give her exactly what she wants? The room went silent except for the ticking of Grandpa's mantel clock. Think about it, Tom continued. Brenda's whole plan depends on forcing Jake off this property quietly. But what if we made it public? What if we gave her a chance to lie under oath in front of witnesses with cameras rolling? Sarah's eyes lit up with the kind of predatory gleam that made opposing counsel nervous. A public HOA meeting. We demand our right to contest the charges in front of the entire community. But not just any meeting, Marcus added, his journalist instincts kicking in. We make it an event. Social media, local TV, maybe even get some state representatives involved, frame it as a story about property rights and community corruption. I found myself grinning for the first time in weeks. So we let her hang herself with her own rope. Exactly. Sarah started making notes, her handwriting flowing across the page like she was drafting a battle plan. But we need to be smart about this. Brenda's going to come prepared with fake documents, coached witnesses, maybe even hired muscle. We need to be ready for anything. Tom's security background proved invaluable for the tactical planning. Hidden cameras perfectly legal on private property. Digital recording equipment for capturing every word. Even contact information for federal agents who specialized in HOA fraud cases. The key is making her feel confident, he explained. Let her think she's won. That Jake's just another victim who'll roll over when faced with official-looking paperwork. The more arrogant she gets, the more mistakes she'll make. Sarah pulled out her phone and started dialing. I'm calling Elena at the county clerk's office. If we're going to do this right, we need official documentation of every fake filing Brenda's made. And Marcus, how quickly can you get media attention for a David versus Goliath property rights story? Give me 48 hours and I'll have cameras from 3 stations. As we planned through the afternoon, the cabin filled with the kind of energy I remembered from military operations, focused, determined, with everyone understanding their role in something bigger than themselves. We weren't just saving my property anymore. We were exposing a criminal who'd been preying on honest homeowners for years. By sunset, we had our strategy. In 1 week, we'd give Brenda Hutchins exactly the public platform she thought she wanted, and we'd let her destroy herself in front of the entire community. Brenda's panic started showing 3 days before our scheduled public meeting. I was sitting on my porch that Wednesday morning watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold when Tom's emergency text lit up my phone. Check the community Facebook page, now. What I found there made my blood boil. A post from Brenda, time-stamped at 3:47 a.m., claiming I'd been making threats against community members and stockpiling weapons in preparation for violent confrontation. The post included grainy photos that supposedly showed suspicious activity around my cabin photos that were clearly taken with a telephoto lens from somewhere on the ridge behind my property. But the real kicker was her claim that I'd been conducting surveillance on families with children and that parents should take precautions for their safety. The woman was trying to paint me as some kind of dangerous predator, all because I dared to fight back against her theft. By noon, the post had 63 comments, split between neighbors who knew me and believed the lies, and others demanding proof of these allegations. The smell of character assassination hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. Sarah drove up from Charlotte that afternoon, her face set in the kind of grim determination that meant someone was about to have a very bad day. She'd printed out screenshots of Brenda's social media campaign, and what she'd discovered made my stomach turn. "Dad, this isn't random panic posting. She's following a playbook." Sarah spread the screenshots across my kitchen table, highlighting specific phrases and timing patterns. "Look at these posts. They're designed to create a legal paper trail. She's building a case for a restraining order that would prevent you from attending the public meeting." The posts followed a clear escalation pattern. First, vague claims about concerning behavior. Then specific allegations about threats that never happened. Finally, dramatic appeals to community safety that painted me as an unstable recluse who posed a danger to children. "She's done this before," Sarah continued, pulling up similar social media campaigns from her previous locations. In Colorado, she used the same tactics against a homeowner who questioned missing HOA funds, built up enough public hysteria that the guy moved away rather than fight. But Brenda's desperation went beyond social media warfare. That evening, I heard the sound of breaking glass from my workshop. When I grabbed my flashlight and investigated, I found 3 windows shattered and spray paint across my workbench. "Leave now, or pay the price." The acrid smell of fresh paint mixed with the night air made me gag, but what really got to me was seeing my grandfather's hand tools scattered across the floor like broken dreams. Someone had deliberately destroyed things that held 60 years of family history. I called the sheriff's department, but when Deputy Collins arrived, he seemed more interested in questioning me about the community concerns than investigating the obvious vandalism. "Jake, I've been getting calls all day about your situation. Maybe it would be better for everyone if you just took whatever settlement they're offering and moved on." Even Mike, who'd been my friend since high school, was buying into Brenda's narrative. The isolation was becoming psychological torture, making me question whether anyone would believe the truth when we finally presented it. Tom found the next escalation attempt when he was checking his security cameras Thursday morning. Footage from 2:30 a.m. showed someone in dark clothing trying to cut his phone lines, the same lines that connected to my cabin through an old party line setup from the 1960s. "They're trying to isolate you completely," Tom explained, showing me the grainy video. "Cut off your communications right before the meeting so you can't coordinate with your legal team." But the most disturbing discovery came when Sarah's paralegal ran a background check on the 3 witnesses Brenda had listed in her latest court filings. People who claimed to have seen me making threats, exhibiting dangerous behavior, and acting irrationally during encounters that never happened. None of them existed. The names were real, pulled from obituaries and old voter registration records, but the people were all dead. Brenda had literally created an army of ghost witnesses to testify against me, counting on the fact that most people don't verify death certificates when reading sworn affidavits. "This is federal territory now," Sarah said, her voice tight with controlled fury. "She's not just forging HOA documents anymore. She's filing false police reports, creating fake witnesses, and using the U.S. mail system to distribute defamatory material. We're talking about multiple felonies." Friday morning brought the final escalation. I woke up to the sound of heavy machinery and found a crew installing what looked like a cell phone tower directly on my property line. When I confronted the foreman, he showed me a work order claiming emergency infrastructure installation for community safety communication. The smell of diesel exhaust filled the morning air as they began digging holes just feet from my grandfather's original fence posts. But when I looked closer at the equipment, I realized this wasn't a cell tower at all. It was a surveillance array, positioned to monitor every inch of my property. Brenda wasn't just trying to steal my land anymore. She was turning it into a prison, with me as the unwilling inmate. Saturday morning, the day before our public showdown, Brenda made her final, desperate play. I was in my kitchen making coffee when the rumble of diesel engines shook the cabin windows. Through the morning mist, I could see a convoy rolling up my driveway like some kind of military operation. 2 black SUVs, a moving truck, and a white van marked County Marshal Service. The smell of exhaust mixed with the scent of pine needles as boots crunched across my gravel. But something felt wrong. Real county marshals don't travel in unmarked vehicles, and they sure as hell don't show up without proper notice. A man in a cheap suit and cheaper sunglasses approached my porch, clipboard in hand like some bureaucratic weapon. Behind him, 4 other men in mismatched uniforms spread out across my yard, trying to look official but moving like hired muscle. Jake Morrison, I'm Marshall Thompson. We're here to execute a court-ordered seizure of this property for immediate sale. You have 30 minutes to gather personal belongings and vacate. He handed me papers that looked official enough to fool most people: county seals, legal stamps, the works. But I'd learned to spot Brenda's handiwork, and these documents reeked of her desperation. "Let me see your badge," I said, keeping my voice steady despite my racing heart. Thompson's hesitation told me everything I needed to know. When he finally produced an ID card, it was so obviously fake that even the lamination looked wrong. That's when I realized Tom was already in position. My neighbor had been watching from his house across the ridge, and I could see the glint of his binoculars catching the morning light. Sarah's legal prep had included contingency plans for exactly this scenario. "You gentlemen need to leave my property immediately," I said, loud enough for Tom's directional microphone to pick up every word. "You're trespassing, and those documents are forgeries. Sir, resistance to a lawful court order is a felony. So is impersonating a law enforcement officer." That's when the real cavalry arrived. Tom had made his calls the moment he spotted the convoy, and Sheriff Collins rolled up my driveway with 2 patrol cars and a very different energy than his previous visits. Behind them came Sarah's car, followed by Marcus with a camera crew from the local TV station. The transformation in Thompson's posture was immediate. The authority melted away, replaced by the shifty nervousness of someone caught in a lie. His marshals started edging toward their vehicles like they were preparing to run. "Jake, what's the situation here?" Collins asked, but his tone suggested he already knew. Sarah stepped forward with her briefcase, every inch the attorney who'd prepared for this moment. "Sheriff, these men are impersonating law enforcement officers and attempting to execute fraudulent court orders. I have documentation proving these documents were never filed with any legitimate court." The TV camera was rolling now, capturing every moment as Thompson's fake authority crumbled. Marcus positioned himself where he could film the license plates of the SUVs, the faces of the fake marshals, and the obvious panic spreading through Brenda's hired crew. "We were told this was a legitimate repossession," Thompson stammered, but his story was falling apart faster than tissue paper in rain. "By whom?" Collins demanded, his cop instincts fully engaged now. "Brenda Hutchins. She hired us through a private security company." Sarah smiled like a shark scenting blood. "Sheriff, I believe you'll find that hiring fake law enforcement officers to execute fraudulent court orders constitutes multiple federal crimes." Within minutes, Collins was reading Thompson his rights while the other fake marshals were being loaded into patrol cars. The moving truck driver, who turned out to be completely innocent of the larger scheme, provided a signed work order that traced directly back to Brenda's personal checking account. But the best part came when Marcus interviewed me for the evening news with my grandfather's cabin as the backdrop and the arrested fake marshals visible in the background. "Mr. Morrison, how does it feel to know that your HOA president hired criminals to forcibly remove you from your family's property?" "It feels like Brenda Hutchins just handed us enough evidence to put her in federal prison for the next decade," I replied, looking directly into the camera. "And it feels like she's desperate enough to try anything to stop tomorrow's public meeting." The footage aired that evening on 3 local stations and was picked up by regional news by midnight. Social media exploded with outrage over the fake Marshall scandal, and suddenly the entire community was paying attention to our David versus Goliath story. Sunday morning, 12 hours before our scheduled public confrontation, Brenda tried one last desperate move. She filed an emergency injunction claiming the public meeting posed a clear and present danger to community safety due to my documented history of violent threats. But Sarah was ready. She'd spent the weekend filing counter motions, and by noon we had a court order not only denying Brenda's injunction, but also requiring her to appear at the public meeting to answer questions about the fake Marshall incident. The trap was set. All we had to do was let Brenda walk into it. The Pine Ridge Community Center had never seen anything like it. By 6 p.m., the parking lot was packed beyond capacity, with cars lining the mountain road for half a mile in each direction. The building itself, a simple wooden structure that normally hosted bingo nights and potluck dinners, buzzed with the energy of a crowd that smelled justice in the air. I arrived 30 minutes early with Sarah and Tom, but we weren't the first ones there. Marcus had set up his camera equipment near the front, while news crews from 3 TV stations claimed strategic positions around the room. The scent of anticipation mixed with the smell of old wood and decades of community meetings. "Jesus, Dad," Sarah whispered as we surveyed the packed room. Half the county showed up. Standing room only didn't begin to describe it. Folding chairs borrowed from the local church filled every available space, while overflow crowds pressed against windows trying to see inside. I recognized faces from town, neighbors I'd known for decades, and plenty of strangers who'd driven from neighboring communities to witness what local news had dubbed the HOA Showdown. Brenda arrived precisely at 7 p.m., flanked by 2 lawyers who looked expensive enough to cost her whatever remained in the HOA treasury. She dressed for battle in a crisp business suit and carried herself with the artificial confidence of someone who still believed she could lie her way out of federal charges. The atmosphere shifted when she entered. Conversations died to whispers, camera flashes exploded like lightning, and the crowd's energy focused on her with laser intensity. She took her seat at the front table, her face set in what I recognized as her community leader mask, but I could see the tremor in her hands when she reached for her water glass. Tom had positioned himself near the back exit old cop habits, while Sarah sat beside me with a briefcase full of evidence that could send Brenda to prison for the next decade. Federal agents had taken seats in the middle of the crowd, their presence both reassuring and ominous. "Ladies and gentlemen," announced the temporary moderator, a county official who'd volunteered to keep the meeting legal, "we're here to address allegations of financial misconduct and procedural violations within the Pine Ridge Homeowners Association." Brenda stood first, her voice carrying that authoritative tone she'd perfected over years of intimidating homeowners. "Thank you all for coming. I want to address the malicious rumors and personal attacks that have been directed at this community's leadership." She launched into a prepared speech about outside agitators and disgruntled residents who refuse to follow community standards. Classic deflection, painting herself as the victim of a conspiracy rather than the architect of systematic fraud. "Mr. Morrison has repeatedly violated community rules, threatened board members, and created a hostile environment that endangers our families," she continued, her voice growing stronger as she hit familiar talking points. "The HOA board acted within our legal authority to protect community assets and property values." When she finished, the room erupted in scattered applause from her remaining supporters, mixed with boos from neighbors who'd finally learned the truth about her operation. Then it was my turn. I stood slowly, feeling the weight of my grandfather's legacy and 4 generations of Morrison family history. The room fell silent except for the whir of camera motors and the scratch of reporters' pens. "Mrs. Hutchins just told you that the HOA board acted within legal authority," I began, my voice carrying clearly through the packed room. "Sarah, would you please play the recording?" The speakers crackled to life with crystal-clear audio of Brenda's voice. "Elena, honey, there's $5,000 cash in it for you if you just misplace those original deed documents for a few weeks. Nobody has to know, and Jake Morrison will be gone before anyone figures it out." The room exploded. Gasps, shouts, and the rapid-fire clicking of camera shutters created a symphony of outrage. Brenda's face went white as she realized we'd recorded her attempted bribery of the county clerk. "That's taken out of context," she started, but Sarah was already standing with her briefcase open. "Perhaps you'd like to explain the context of these forged board meeting minutes," Sarah said, holding up documents that showed unanimous votes on days when 3 board members were verifiably out of state. "Or maybe you can explain how you approved $80,000 in expenditures to companies that don't exist." Federal Agent Patricia Morgan stepped forward from the crowd, her badge visible as she approached the front table. "Mrs. Hutchins, you're under arrest for mail fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit theft by deception." The room erupted in cheers as Agent Morgan read Brenda her rights. Cameras flashed like strobe lights while Brenda's expensive lawyers frantically whispered in her ear. But it was too late for legal maneuvering. As they led her toward the exit in handcuffs, I stood and delivered the line I'd been saving for 2 months. "Brenda, when you get to federal prison, Tell them Jake Morrison's grandfather built something that lasts. The standing ovation shook the old building's rafters and probably woke up half the mountain. 6 months later, I'm sitting on this same porch where it all started, watching my 3-month-old grandson sleep in the afternoon sunshine. Sarah named him Ezra after his great-great-grandfather, and there's something deeply satisfying about hearing that name echo through these mountains again. Brenda got 8 years in federal prison. Her son-in-law flipped faster than a pancake on Sunday morning, which helped the FBI uncover similar schemes in 4 other states. Turns out our little mountain community was just the latest stop in a criminal enterprise that had been stealing from homeowners for over a decade. The fake Marshall incident made national news. HOA fraud ring exposed became the headline that launched 1,000 investigative reports into HOA abuse across the country. Congress even held hearings on HOA oversight reform, though whether anything meaningful comes from that remains to be seen. But the real victory happened right here in our community. The old HOA was dissolved, and we formed a new one with transparency requirements that would make the IRS jealous. Every financial transaction gets posted online within 48 hours. Board meetings are live-streamed and archived. And any assessment over $50 requires a community-wide vote with 2 weeks' notice. Tom got elected as our new president, which surprised exactly nobody. The man runs HOA meetings like a police briefing, efficient, transparent, and with zero tolerance for bullshit. Property values actually went up after the corruption scandal. Turns out buyers prefer honest communities to pretty facades. Sarah opened a practice specializing in HOA abuse cases, and she's busier than a one-legged cat in a sandbox. The Jake Morrison law passed the state legislature last month, requiring HOA board members to disclose criminal histories and submit to background checks. It's not perfect, but it's a start. The most satisfying part? We turned my grandfather's 3 acres into something that would make the old man proud. The Ezra Morrison Community Trust now protects 200 acres of mountain forest in perpetuity. No development, no mining, just pure North Carolina wilderness for future generations. Every summer we host the Beat the HOA Festival, part family reunion, part legal education seminar, part bluegrass concert. Last year we raised $50,000 for homeowners fighting HOA abuse in neighboring counties. This year's goal is $75,000, and judging by the early ticket sales, we're going to blow past that number. Marcus won a state journalism award for his coverage of the scandal, and his documentary, The Cabin War, just got picked up by Netflix. Tom's security consulting business has more clients than he can handle. Seems like half the homeowners in 3 counties want his advice on protecting themselves from HOA corruption. Me? I'm teaching my grandson the same lessons my grandfather taught me. How to read the weather by watching the clouds gather over the ridgeline. How to tell oak from maple by the texture of their bark. How to stand up for what's right, even when the whole world seems stacked against you. The mineral deposits are still down there, worth more than ever according to the latest geological surveys. Mining companies call every few months with offers that would set my family up for generations. But some things are worth more than money, and this land is one of them. Sarah brought little Ezra up last weekend, and we spent Saturday afternoon in the garden where my grandfather grew victory vegetables during World War II. The baby's too young to understand the stories yet, but I told them anyway, about the man who built this place with his bare hands, about the fight to keep it in the family, about standing up to bullies no matter how much power they think they have. The legal settlements from insurance companies and Brenda's seized assets totaled just over $800,000, but we didn't keep a penny of it. Every dollar went into the community trust, the legal defense fund, and college scholarships for kids whose families can't afford higher education. Because at the end of the day, this was never about money. It was about family, community, and the idea that regular people shouldn't have to bow down to petty tyrants who hide behind official-sounding titles. So here's my challenge to you. Drop a comment and share your worst HOA nightmare. Let's build a database of abuse cases that future victims can reference when they're fighting their own battles. And hit that subscribe button, because next week I'm telling you about the woman who turned her HOA's own rules against them when they tried to steal her garden. Trust me, her revenge was absolutely beautiful.